Someone Like You by Sparkypasker. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 21. Izuku was out patrolling Sector 3. He was jumping building to building, watching for anything suspicious. The thoughts of a mysterious quirk swirled in the back of his mind. There were a couple assumptions he could make about it. Firstly, quirks are a genetic anomaly. There is no way to store something genetic successfully without degrading. If it's degraded, then it's of no use to anyone. Therefore, it had to be passed on from person to person. The villain the story mentioned, All for One, supposedly had the power to give and take quirks, so there being a second quirk out there able to go person to person would not be too far of a stretch. Secondly, it was powerful. There would be no other reason to keep it around otherwise. There was absolutely no way to determine for sure what it did, but Izuku had a theory. What if it was a copy of All for One? Copy quirks are fairly common and have been for decades. If All for One had taken one, he could have copied his quirk. Even if he had the power to give and take quirks, that doesn't necessarily extend to his own quirk. After all, if he had the power to give it away, there would not be any way to get it back. But make a copy of it and distribute it to trusted allies? That would be an extremely easy way to take over the world, especially if there were some kind of drawback that he had found a quirk to negate. But the person he gave a copy to didn't necessarily have that same protection. That would be a way to safeguard his operation. But what if the person he gave the copy to wasn't actually planning on using the quirk? If someone had gone undercover, earned All for One's trust, gotten the copy, then split without getting caught, that would definitely cause All for One to get pissed off enough to go after them. Villains tended to not be very forgiving of betrayal. It would also cause him to be cautious enough to not want to risk doing the same thing again. But then the question became, why wouldn't the heroes simply allow the quirk to die with them? Unless All for One was able to take quirks from the dead. That would definitely be a problem that would require this quirk to stay alive. But that wasn't what Izuku should have been thinking of right now. Instead, he should be paying attention to the man getting mugged in the alley below. A thin man with ragged and dirty blonde hair was backed up against a wall, holding a thin envelope to his chest. Another man with long, glittering nails was stepping closer, hand outstretched towards the envelope. "Give me the money," he sneered. The blonde shook his head and clutched it tighter. Izuku didn't need to hear any more. He jumped from the roof and landed on the shoulders of the assailant. The man's knees collapsed underneath him, and he fell to the ground with a scream. "Back away," Izuku said to the victim. He was almost disappointed. He knew that the longer the fights took, the more likely Izuku was to get hurt. But all it took was the element of surprise, and the villain went down? What's up with that? He wanted to try out some of his moves, at least a little, but this is fine for his first takedown. Izuku took a zip tie out of a pocket on his thigh and tied the assailant's arms behind his back. "Call dispatch." Izuku used the voice command in his operating system to call the closest dispatch. "Please state the nature of your emergency," a woman on the other end of the line said. "This is CF-2357. I have a villain that needs to be picked up," he responded. "Oh, a crime fighter," she said happily. "Nice to have you around. I will send someone out. Just remember to have the evidence available. Unfortunately, if there is no evidence of a crime, the responding officer will release the suspect." "Noted. Thank you." Oh, so polite. Izuku could hear the smile in her voice before she hung up. About 5 minutes later, a police car with lights flashing pulled up to the alley. A tall man with dark hair underneath a police hat stepped out of the car and walked over to Izuku and the whimpering villain. "You better not have brought me out here for nothing," he grumbled. Izuku pulled up a hologram from a bracelet on his wrist and began playing the video of the encounter. It clearly showed the villain using his quirk to intimidate the civilian, and the audio caught the man wanting to take the victim's money. The officer nodded, helped the villain stand, and put him in the back of the police car. The video should be enough evidence to convict him of public quirk usage and attempted assault. Make sure to stop by after your patrol to sign the paperwork. The police officer closed the door, then leaned against the car. You know, I'm surprised someone like you was able to capture someone with a quirk. Keep up the good work, he said. Will do, Izuku said in a fake but cheerful voice. Even when there is physical proof that he is able to do just as much as someone with a quirk, it's still a surprise when he actually does it. Why? Why is it so surprising that someone without a quirk can do the same things as someone with one? Is he still not good enough? He didn't understand. Izuku took a deep breath, held it for a few seconds, then slowly exhaled. He needed to stop with that line of thinking. If he kept going, he was going to just work himself up, and there was a victim that needed to be attended to. Izuku turned around and found the civilian right where he left him, standing in the dark corner in the back of the alley. The blonde-haired man walked out of the shadows towards Izuku. Thank you for your help, he said quietly. You're welcome, Izuku responded. It was quiet for a few seconds. What's your name? Absent. Thank you again, Absent. The civilian unclenched his hands from the crinkled envelope and tried to smooth it out. What the mugger was trying to steal was my paycheck. I have 3 younger siblings, and they haven't eaten in 4 days. Tears pooled in his eyes as he spoke. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Izuku started to tear up under his mask. He always had cried easily. If it wasn't a song or something in the news or something on TV, it was someone walking by on the sidewalk who was having a bad day. He breathed deeply, but didn't try to stop the tears from falling. That would require him to take his mask off. I will escort you home, he said calmly. The man started walking and Izuku followed. A few blocks from where the attempted mugging happened, Izuku saw a convenience store. The two of them stopped inside. Izuku may not have had a lot of money, but he had enough to purchase some rice balls. The blonde cried silently as they left. After about 15 minutes, they came across a rundown building. Most of the apartments had notices of unsafe living with holes in the roof and broken windows. The apartment Izuku was led to didn't look much different. There were cracks in the windows sealed with duct tape. The outside of the door looked like it had been opened with a crowbar more than once. They weren't even able to get to the door before it was opened by 3 young children. The oldest couldn't have been older than 6. The blonde leaned down and gave them the rice balls. They each grabbed one and began eating them quickly. Hey, he whispered. Try to eat a little slower. You're going to upset your stomach. He stood back up and looked at Izuku. I can't thank you enough for what you did for us today. Seeing you get home safe is good enough for me. I heard you tell the dispatch that you were CF something. You wouldn't say that if you were a hero. That's right. I'm not a hero. And I get that. But even though that's the case, you are our hero. If there's anything you need that I'm able to provide, I want to give that to you. We don't have much, but I work as a janitor in a brothel. I hear a lot of things. I don't want to put you in danger. Izuku attempts to dissuade. I won't be in any danger. After all, quirkless people are little more than furniture. Izuku was speechless. One of the children came up behind their brother, a little girl with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Are you a hero? They asked. Izuku kneeled down to be at the same height as the girl. No, I'm not. I am a crime fighter. The child's head tilted to the side. Isn't that the same thing? She then left her brother to grab another rice ball. Izuku stood. I will keep you in mind, he said, unable to keep the waver from his voice this time. He watched the four siblings return to their home and shut the door before he left to finish his patrol. Izuku stopped 2 more muggings and a sexual assault that night. The muggings went about the same as the first, but he had a little more difficulty. Evidently, sex, even non-consensual, is a larger motivator than money. It was slightly awkward trying to fight a man with an erection sticking out of his pants. But that was enough of a motivator for Izuku to quickly punch the guy in the temple. After that, he felt like the big bad wolf blowing over the straw house. Each time, the same officer would come to pick up the suspect, and each time, he always made some comment about it being surprising that Izuku is able to take down someone with a quirk. By the time Izuku was done with his shift and headed to the precinct to complete his paperwork, he was almost certain that the officer was trying to discourage him, to make him second guess himself, to make him doubt. And damn it, that was not going to happen. He had proved that to himself 4 times tonight. He, quirkless, worthless little Izuku, was able to fight villains with nothing more than his own abilities, and Izuku wasn't the only one to believe it. The victims he saved thought so too. They didn't care that he was quirkless, not that they knew. All they cared about was that someone cared enough about them to stop something bad from happening. Izuku walked into the precinct at nearly 4 in the morning. He was greeted by the officer stationed at the front desk. "Hey, are you the new crime fighter Sergeant has been grumbling about all night?" "I guess," Izuku responded. That didn't exactly make him think differently about the man that came to pick up his arrests. "Good. I'm glad someone finally gave that man some paperwork. He usually just naps in his office when he has to work the night shift and pawns any paperwork off on us. But with you, he is required to do all of it. Because of the whole having to get your own evidence thing, someone of higher rank has to verify it." Izuku took a flash drive out of his pocket and placed it on the desk. "Well, there it is. The audio and video evidence for the night." "Sorry, kid. I can't take it. Go ahead and head to the first office on your right. That's where the sergeant is. Give him the evidence, then sign your paperwork, and you're good to go." Izuku picks the drive back up, then walks to the office indicated by the front desk. Inside, the sergeant is bent over a small stack of papers, brows scrunched together and face set in a grimace. Izuku knocked on the open door before entering. "Here's the evidence for the night," he said. "Go ahead and put it there." Sergeant indicated to the surface of his desk. Izuku set the flash drive down. "I understand I have some papers to sign?" "Yeah, sign here and here." The sergeant was indicating to a signature line attesting that he was the arresting officer, despite the fact that he was not an officer. They probably got so few crime fighters that they just used their normal forms rather than making up new ones. The second place to sign was a waiver contesting that he had personally collected the evidence and that the officers were not at fault if it wasn't enough to convict. Izuku reluctantly signed that as well. It was either sign it or allow the villains to go free. Izuku felt like it was just too much of a risk that the officers could destroy it just to smite him and prevent him from gaining any sort of good reputation. Good thing he was keeping a copy. "Okay, everything is filled out. You're free to go. Good job tonight, but be careful. Don't get in over your head. Just because you captured a few minor criminals doesn't mean you're good enough to act like you're a hero." Izuku bit his lip beneath his mask. He was glad no one could see his face because he was sure that if they could, he would not be allowed to use his precinct anymore. No one with a quirk ever liked it when he showed emotion. It made them think Izuku thought of himself as being, quote, on their level, despite the fact that literally everyone is on the same level. Some just have different advantages than others that allow their lives to be slightly easier, whether that be money, influence, or a quirk. But they would learn. They would learn that eventually. Izuku would keep working to make this area safe. Maybe then they would realize that he is just as good as they are. Chapter 22. Izuku walked into the cafe the next morning yawning. Normally, he didn't take advantage of the free coffee, but that was definitely going to happen now. After filling out his paperwork and going home and winding down, he didn't get to sleep until nearly 5. And then, of course, he had to wake up at 7 to get to work by 8. So he had gotten a whole 2 hours of sleep. He was going to have to up the number of naps he takes. If he was tired, he wasn't going to be as effective when working nights. He could pretty much do his cafe job while asleep, so being tired while working there was just mildly uncomfortable rather than life-threatening to both the people he was trying to save and himself as well. Boss was fairly certain work was going to be slow that day due to it being the first day of school for many of the schools in the area. Less sales when there are less teenagers with disposable income walking out and about and all that. It just so happened to also be UA's first day of school as well, so Izuku would be working alone. Izuku put on his apron and began setting up the coffee pots. He took a small cup off the floating shelf above the coffee and poured himself a serving. It wasn't likely to have enough caffeine to do a lot, but it would help. After the cafe opened, Izuku had a small rush of the regular customers. It didn't take nearly as long as he thought it would to go through the line, more because he had their normal orders memorized and less about the size of the line itself. After that, silence permeated the cafe. Boss didn't even bother baking anymore that morning. Izuku heard her typing on her computer in her office. She had mentioned something about not having time recently to do her accounting and needing to possibly hire someone to work the kitchen. Izuku sat in the chair at his analysis station with his head on the counter. He had his eyes closed but was not comfortable enough to fall asleep. Sometimes just closing your eyes and breathing deeply tricks your body into believing it slept and gives you some energy. The bell above the door rang as the door opened. Izuku sat up and said, "Welcome," with a cheerful voice. A man sat down across from Izuku, a dark blue hoodie pulled up over a familiar head of shaggy light blue hair. "We meet again, rogue," he said. "Did you decide you wanted some tips on your quirk? Last time you came around, you didn't stick around long enough for me to tell you much," Izuku responded. Shigaraki took the All Might photo out of his pocket and flattened it out on the counter between them. "I am looking for information about All Might." "I told you the first time, I only give my customers information about their own quirks." "Fine. Then how would you like a job? I know rogues are always looking." "Not this one." Izuku wasn't sure why Shigaraki kept calling him a rogue, but it didn't hurt his feelings, and it didn't cost him anything to play along. Just one more thing he could add to his personality profile. "But don't you? Isn't there anything you want? I can get you money, power, people, whatever you want, you can have if you join my party." Izuku felt goosebumps slither across his skin and a shiver bolt down his spine. "Not interested," he stated firmly. "Fine." Shigaraki spat and stood from his chair. Before Izuku could react, Shigaraki grabbed the coffee cup Izuku was using and held it between all 5 of his fingers. "Just remember, the next time we meet, I won't be so generous." Izuku watched the remnants of the cup sprinkle down onto the counter. Shigaraki stuffed his hands into his pocket once again and calmly walked out the door. Izuku was under no illusions that had the cafe been located in a less hero-populated area, Shigaraki would have acted on his threat rather than just stating it. Izuku wasn't sure what Shigaraki wanted him for, but there was no way Izuku was going to walk into that without more information. Well, now Izuku had something to do until the after-school rush. He also needed to contact Hatsume. If Shigaraki followed Izuku back into his neighborhood, he would definitely follow through with his threat. Izuku needed some equipment that would help him if he came into contact with Shigaraki again without his gear. And it had to be discreet. If he was wearing something that was obviously support gear, someone would call the police. It was illegal for someone with a quirk to wear support gear that had nothing to do with how their quirk worked. They could use it if it was necessary for them to continue their daily activities, but other than that, nope. Izuku thought it was pretty stupid, but it didn't really matter to him personally due to him not having a quirk. But it does matter with him professionally because the analyst has an intelligence quirk and therefore can't wear support gear. Before Izuku knew it, Uraraka was walking in through the front door. "How was class?" Izuku asked, getting the cafe ready for the afternoon rush. "Hi, Midoriya. It was good, but my teacher is so weird," she said cheerfully. "Weird?" "Yeah. So instead of going to orientation, he made us go through this whole quirk assessment thing. He even threatened to expel us if we didn't do well enough." "Expel us? On the first day? Who does that?" she rambled. "Well, you obviously passed, right?" "Of course. I may not have the strongest quirk, but I was still able to use it well enough to get first place on one of the tests." "Great job." Izuku smiled wildly. "How has your day been?" Uraraka asked. "Slow, but it should get busier now that classes and clubs are starting to let out." "Yeah, this will probably be the only day I get here this early. Our heroics class is during the time the other departments have clubs, so I won't get here until after that gets out." "That's all right. I can hold down the fort until you get here." "Oh, you never told me who your homeroom teacher is." "Oh, yeah. So I have never heard of him, but he's this homeless-looking guy who says his hero name is Eraserhead." Izuku abruptly stops his prep. "No way! Really?" he asked with stars in his eyes. "What, you've heard of him?" "Of course! He's only the best of the best in underground heroics." "Underground?" "Yeah, he specializes in infiltration, covert operations, and spying, things like that." "Sounds like you know a lot about him." "Yeah, he's my favorite hero." Izuku slid closer to Uraraka and spoke quietly. "He's also the hero that has to fight like me." "Oh, yeah. He showed us his quirk today. When he looks at someone, they can't use their quirks anymore. I guess that wouldn't give him much of any help in way of fighting." "That's right. I learned how to fight from watching videos of him online." "I tried looking him up during lunch, but I couldn't find anything. How did you find videos?" "You have to be quick. They get posted occasionally, but normally get taken down within a few hours. Since he's an underground hero, his identity is more heavily protected than limelight heroes." "Then how do you get to watch them?" "You can't always be online to find them. I have this program set up on my laptop that automatically downloads any video that is posted that contains certain keywords. Normally, people don't actually know that who they videotaped was Eraserhead, but they almost always use the same description. I probably have the largest collection of Eraserhead videos in the world." Oh, can we watch some of them tonight?" "Sure." Izuku was interrupted from continuing the conversation by high schoolers dressed in sports attire entering the cafe. It was time for the two of them to get to work. Izuku and Uraraka walked together to the station after work. Izuku was quietly talking to her about all the videos he had seen. He didn't want anyone else to overhear. Having anyone who had less than desirable intentions knowing anything about him could become disastrous. "Hey, do you want to have a slumber party?" Uraraka asked. "A what?" Izuku looked at her confused. "A slumber party. We can stay up late and watch videos, and then just fall asleep whenever we fall asleep." "But don't you have school tomorrow?" "It wouldn't be the first time I went to school tired. Besides, I can tell my whole class about what I learned about Eraserhead when I get there tomorrow." Izuku laughed. "Sure, why not?" Uraraka smiled. "Good. I'm going to go grab my blankets. Be right back. Izuku left his door open, and by the time he had his collection of videos pulled up, Uraraka was back with her blankets. They piled the blankets together in the middle of the room, and after a couple dozen videos and endless analysis by Izuku, the two of them fell asleep. End of chapter.